And during that interview, our Fed chairman demonstrated a complete lack of understanding of basic economics, of the Fed's role in creating the conditions that led up to and exacerbated the Depression of the 1930s. He is completely clueless regarding the Fed's role in creating the current economic crisis, and he has absolutely no idea how much damage his current monetary policy is doing to the U.S. economy. In fact, he mentioned in that 60 Minutes interview that his greatest fear was that the government would lack the political will to continue with all the bailouts and all the stimulus packages. You know, that's my greatest fear, that they will continue to do exactly what Ben Bernanke thinks we need to do, because that's going to completely destroy our economy. You know, if there was any political will in this country, we would repudiate everything that Ben Bernanke is doing. We would abandon the stimulus plans and the bailouts. We would let the free market function. We would swallow this bitter medicine. We would allow the economy to right itself and to rebalance itself. But no, unfortunately, we are going to follow Ben Bernanke's advice and Barack Obama in Congress, and we're going to destroy this economy. We're going to create a situation far worse than anything that we experienced during the 1930s. In fact, Americans of this generation are going to look back at the 1930s with jealousy about how good people had it back then. You know, I mean, this is just amazing. You know, there was one kernel of truth in what Ben Bernanke said. He mentioned that he thought the problem was created by a glut of foreign savings that came into the United States, and that we took all this money that we borrowed and we did not invest it properly. He had mentioned that had we invested the money properly, that everything would have been okay. But because we didn't invest it properly, that's the problem. Now, when he says we didn't invest it properly, what does he mean? Well, what he really means was we spent the money. We didn't invest it at all. That was the problem. We borrowed money to build houses, to buy cars, to buy consumer goods. We spent the money, and now we can't pay it back. That was the problem. Now, first of all, how did foreigners get all this money? Was it an accident? No. They got the money because we ran these huge trade deficits. They recycled the trade deficits back into our debt. But why is it that Americans were spending all this money in the first place? It was because of the Fed. The Fed kept interest rates much too low. Because interest rates were so low, we consumed too much. We didn't save enough. So we shipped our money abroad. Foreign governments, of course, then recycled that money back into U.S. debt instruments to prop up our currency to keep us spending. But again, we didn't invest that money productively. We simply spent it. Also, you know, Ben Bernanke talks about all the foreign savings. Well, why didn't we have any domestic savings? It was because of the monetary policy of the Fed. Interest rates were too low. People were being punished for saving money, so they didn't save any. We were going into debt, and the asset bubbles that the Fed inflated enabled us to think that we can replace legitimate savings with asset price appreciation. But the Fed could have stopped that anytime it wanted. The Fed could have raised interest rates aggressively. The Fed could have ended all those malinvestments. The Fed could have cut off that flow of funds, but it chose not to for political reasons. It loved the phony economy. Everybody felt great. The politicians loved it because they all got reelected. And Ben Bernanke, or rather Alan Greenspan, was just a lapdog for these politicians. The Fed created this problem. It was their monetary policy. And if Ben Bernanke doesn't understand this, how is he going to help solve the problem? In fact, if what he's saying is true, that the problem resulted from the fact that we borrowed and spent too much money, how is borrowing and spending even more going to solve it? The policies that Ben Bernanke is pursuing are simply involve borrowing even more money from the same foreign sources and squandering it in the same way. We're blowing it on consumption. We're spending it on government services. We are not investing that money. So if we got into trouble borrowing and spending money in the past, how much more trouble are we going to get into borrowing and spending it now? You know, Ben Bernanke in that interview said that prosperity is around the corner, that the recession is going to end. It's nowhere nearing an end. We're much closer to the beginning, and his policies are making sure we haven't even begun to repair the damage done to our economy. We're still doing new damage. So if we haven't even started to address these imbalances yet, how can prosperity be around the corner? And remember, this is exactly what Ben Bernanke said over and over again. And you know, Ben Bernanke is right. He talked about the fact that we borrowed all this money and that we squandered it. Now we can't pay it back. You know, this dovetails with the last week we had rumblings from the Chinese premier about the fact that they're worried about all the U.S. government bonds they own and all the mortgage-backed securities. Well, how are we going to pay that money back? According to Ben Bernanke, we didn't invest the money wisely. We're blowing it. We can't pay it back. The Chinese have to know that. You know, it's amazing that, you know, we had officials from the Obama administration reassuring the Chinese that their investments are safe. I mean, that reminds me of the guy from Bear Stearns going on television telling everybody how sound Bear Stearns is. I mean, what do we expect? Do we think Obama administration is going to send a representative to say, you know what, Chinese, you're right, you're screwed on this one? You know, you loaned us all this money, you haven't a prayer of getting it back? You know, how can we possibly pay the Chinese back the money we borrowed? We can't. I mean, can you imagine Barack Obama delivering a speech where he says to the Americans, my fellow Americans, unfortunately, we're going to have to raise taxes. We're going to have to raise taxes on the average American worker who still has a job across the board. The biggest tax increase in U.S. history. You know, we're also going to have to cut Social Security. A lot of you are getting Social Security checks. These checks are going to have to be smaller. We're also going to have to abandon our plans for education and health care and the environment because we need the money. We need to give the money to the Chinese because we owe them a lot of money. We borrowed a lot of money, and we have to make interest payments to the Chinese. And, you know, interest rates are rising, and those payments are getting more expensive, so we need the money. So we need to raise taxes. Does anybody believe for 1 second that we're going to do that? Of course not. You know, we're going to basically vilify the Chinese. We're going to blame them for the problem. We're going to say that they were predatory lenders. We're going to ask for modification. We're going to say we need a cram down. We need interest rate reductions. We need maturity extensions. You know, we can't handle this adjustable rate mortgage on the national debt any more than American citizens can handle their own mortgages. You know, this is one giant Ponzi scheme, just like Bernie Madoff. And the Chinese realize that. I mean, if the Chinese are making these statements in public about the fact that they're worried about the safety of these bonds, can you imagine what they're saying behind the scenes? You know, I mean, it used to be just lower level Chinese officials who had these rumblings. Now you've got it from the very top. They know they're screwed on this one. They know they're not going to get their money back. They're just trying to get out of this thing gracefully. But there is no way to get out of it gracefully. They're just going to have to bite the bullet. They're going to have to spend these dollars and stop loaning us money because we can't pay it back. And again, as Ben Bernanke said, we're not making productive use of the money, so how can we possibly pay it back? We're spending it, and we're going to spend all the money they're foolish enough to lend us until they stop lending. And of course, the best thing that can happen to us is that they do stop lending. Hopefully, when they do, Ben Bernanke doesn't keep running up the printing presses. I mean, he actually talked about on 60 Minutes, he said, we're just printing money. He said, it's not the taxpayers who are paying for this, we're literally printing money. Of course, Ben Bernanke said that at some point in the future, the Fed is going to have to take back all this excess money. We're going to have to raise interest rates and contract money supply. But who's he kidding? He doesn't have the political courage to do that. If he had that kind of courage, he'd be doing it right now. Because by letting us go deeper into debt, if they were to do the right thing in a couple of years and raise interest rates, they'd create an even bigger economic crisis because we'd have even more debts to unwind. You know, the deeper we go into debt, the more difficult it is to raise rates and to fight the inflation. So who is he kidding? You know, if the Fed had any integrity, they would have done the right thing years ago. They would have stopped the bubble from inflating. But as I said, they love the bubble. They love the phony prosperity. So what's going to ultimately happen is when the Chinese act on their fears and stop lending us money, it's not going to be a disaster for China by any stretch. It's going to be a huge boom. It's going to be a disaster here because we're going to face a critical juncture. We're going to either have to make the hard choices that we can't make today and that we didn't make in the past, or we're going to let Ben Bernanke continue to run up the printing presses, and we're going to have an inflationary depression, maybe even hyperinflation. That's what's coming. That's what Ben Bernanke is going to create. He is so fixated on making sure we don't repeat the Great Depression that he's going to make sure that we repeat something far worse than the Great Depression. Anyway, that's it for today, everybody. I'll be blogging again probably tomorrow or the next day. Thank you.